Well, jeepers! You're listening to Smash or Pass.
Hello, everybody. Happy Halloween and welcome back to our Halloween special interview. I'm JB, and of course, with me is Millie.
Hi.
And the special returning guest who will be speaking today is Sichta. Thank you so much for joining.
Hey guys, great to be with you again. Thank you for having me back.
It's incredible to have you back because I'll shout this out now. We did a part one. I'm gonna say about a year ago now, maybe even more than a year, which is completely crazy because I remember it like it was yesterday. But I feel like in that one we covered quite a lot of ground from stuff like the Alien Invaders all the way until I want to say chill out Scooby Doo. And so now, quite luckily, we're going to be covering the Goblin King for the Halloween special, which of course you wrote, directed, and produced, which is incredible. So I'll ask, towards the start of that venture, how did you get into working on the Goblin King?
Yeah, wow. Well, at that time, this was the fourth Scooby movie that I had put together for Warner Brothers Animation, and we had done Scooby Doo and the Loch Ness Monster, which we had treated sort of like a atmospheric, classic horror movie, a Hammer horror from the Great British film company. We kind of took that as sort of our mode, and then we did Where's My Mummy, which was more of a David Lean Egyptian epic, Joseph Mankiewicz, Cleopatra. We did that sort of genre movie, and then we went into Chill Out Scooby Doo, which was a mountain picture. Was the Yeti, and so we were playing around this idea of putting Shaggy and Scooby into different genres and just seeing what these guys would do given these sort of different circumstances, and then somewhere along the way got into the idea of doing a Wizard of Oz kind of treatment. Like, what could you do with a Wizard of Oz meets Alice in Wonderland, kind of taking them to some sort of other magical land, if you will. Can we do that? Will we break it? Will we stress test the property here? Are they allowed to do that sort of stuff? And at that same time, for whatever reason, I was really just getting into the history of Halloween, its kind of Celtic origins, and the concept that on Halloween night, the veil between the real living world and the magic world, not the world of the dead and all that, but the magic world, the world of fairies and goblins and spooks and specters, that was the gossamer barrier between those two worlds is that at its thinnest on Halloween. And that idea just grabbed me, and I thought, well, let's start, see if we can pull in on that and get something going. So that was the beginning of it. It was sort of a mix of, could we do a Wizard of Oz type story where they meet all these characters as they go along and gather their allies through the adventure that they go through, and could we weave in this idea of the thin barrier between our world and the magic world, and then what would that look like? Could we even pull it off? That was really where it started.
It is amazing. I mean, it certainly sounds like you said with the kind of barrier been, lighter on Halloween and things like that. Was it very much from the beginning this was going to be a Halloween movie? Was that something that was pitched kind of, we want something to go out on Halloween, or was it, that fits the idea that you've just told us absolutely perfectly?
Yeah, I think there probably was. It's tough to remember now, but there must have been at some point maybe some interest that, gee, could we do a Halloween something? And Halloween is, Halloween's not celebrated all over the world. It's not in every country, and Scooby is a global brand. And so there was some discussion of, gee, is that really a wide enough concept? And so I think that we came back with, well, what if we just had a really strong idea, really strong idea for a story? And I even think at that time we were looking, or I was personally trying to see, gee, could we make the jump from DVDs to a feature? Well, could this really be, even though we're making these more or less feature length DVD movies, is there an appetite, would there be an appetite at the studio to produce a full feature? And to do that, we needed something kind of bigger, that could sustain. And so this kind of larger, bigger story kind of came out. And I remember, when we first came up with the basic beat board of the story, and I remember giving myself a deadline. I set a meeting with Sandra Schwartz, who was our president of Warner Brothers Animation at the time, and I said, on Friday I'm going to get a meeting with him. And so I spent all that week just working like crazy, trying to get it together, giving myself that deadline to be able to go present him something. And God bless him, he sat there for 45 minutes while I jumped and ran around his room and made, walked through all the story and played all the parts. I was doing this giant thing. At one point, he takes his glasses off and he's just rubbing his eyes. He's going, oh my God, this pitch is not ending. It'll never end. But he finally, at the end of it, he said, okay, I like where this is going. But he also informed me at that time there really wasn't an appetite at the studio for moving into features with Scooby. So let's look at this as a DVD. And I thought, okay. And then I kind of walked out of that meeting kind of good news, bad news, going, okay, well, he likes the story, he likes the idea, but it's maybe not going to be the delusions of grandeur that I had that this would somehow find its way to a feature. But could we produce it, for a DVD movie? Would the scope of it be too big? Would it be manageable? And we just, that all comes down to just making sure you get the right team. And we had we've been working with the same group of folks at Loto Animation in Korea at that time, and a pretty steady stream of artists who were working on Scooby movies with us in pre-production in Hollywood. And the pipeline was there, the team was there, the group of people we were able to dip into a pool, even though the DVD movies were on these really, challenging schedules to do something of a large scope like this movie. When you have the right people and you get lightning in a bottle, then you're got a decent shot at being successful with it. So I think back on the production of this movie, and you always think about the people that you produced it with and the incredible talents that they brought to producing it and making it. And you see it go from this idea on a bulletin board of some rough sketches. I'd done a bunch of rough sketches of what I tried to go to, and then to see them just take it and develop these locations and characters and these worlds out into things that are really, really hold up on screen. That's always the joy of the animated process, that they take some rough idea that you have, give it to a great group of people who really elevate it, make it their own, take it and just take it someplace you could have never gotten it there by yourself. And I just rewatched it just to remind myself it's been so long, and it all that's what comes back is, oh, that section's by Kevin. Oh, Sandra did that section. Our directors Sandy Frame and Kevin Altieri and Alan Caldwell, each one of them, even the sections of the movie, bear their mark and their character and their ideas for how to explore and extrapolate on these story points and make them just whiz bang fun, exciting. And it just comes through. So that is still and always is the joy of this process. So even though it maybe didn't end up on the big screen like I had originally thought maybe it could, it translated really, really well. I think it hit its mark for what we were trying to do. Whether that was a mark we should go after or not, I think there's some controversy about Goblin King, that it breaks the barriers. It's supposed to be always a guy in a mask, and we thought, well, we got one caveat, that monsters, if that thin barrier on Halloween is really that, if that's really the case, the thin barrier between the real world and the magic world, we might be able to skirt by and have that be our reason that we could maybe bring Scooby into this more fanciful world. Or whether that would work or not, whether the audience would accept that or not, whether that would somehow take things too far. I think at that point we're willing to experiment. We were looking to see if where we could take it, and it was really that allure of, gee, could we do a Wizard of Oz? Could we do an Alice in Wonderland? How could we do that and yet still stay true to what makes Shaggy and Scooby and the gang, such great characters, and not break the characters, not break the sense of the property itself, but to give it that extra twist, that turn, and just have fun with it. That was really ultimately the big goal.
That is so interesting, and I love that vision of you pitching this to Sandra. It just seems like that whole thing kind of went into quite a lot of detail, but also because we look at Goblin King and there's obviously a lot to like about it, and there's a lot of things that it does that you may not expect, but on top of all of that, it's also like a pseudo or full-blown musical as well. At what point was that decided? Was that in that pitch that you did to Sandra, or was that kind of decided along the way?
Yeah, up until that point, we had done Actually, that's a great question. That's a really great. I hadn't really even thought of this, but we had done up till that point, all of the songs were romps, right? They're gag sequences, and we're always writing and doing, about three. I believe we did 3 original songs per movie, but there was just, Shaggy and Scooby run away from the monster, and we do a series of gags, and the song plays over the top of the gags and tries to support the gag sequences. And we try to drop it in places that are entertaining and fit the rhythm and pace of the movie to give us all that fun and entertainment. But in this case, it was, well, if we're gonna go kind of to this otherworldly sort of approach, could we also have it be more of a sort of story point kind of musical sequences? And could we do more of a musical theater approach to it? What if characters, because we hadn't done that either, we were pushing boundaries, seeing where, seeing it, I guess, in a way where the breaking points were, and could we just skirt up, push up next to those, have as much fun as we could have, and always have it be tongue-in-cheek. We never played it straight. We always played it for goofy fun, like Wallace Shawn when he's doing Mr. Gibbles and his, you never know who's at the door on Halloween night song. What's funny about that, he's presenting a story point that you're in my magic shop, but it's a sales pitch. He's trying to sell the magic, and so he's doing this whole great magic demonstration of the different things in his shop. But he's telling them the story of Halloween night. He's unpacking for them that what happens, how light and dark are balanced, all the story points building that world are in that song, but he's also like making a pitch to them to buy stuff from him. So that always cracked me up. So I think, and then when Kevin Altieri and I were doing the What Goes Bump in the Night sequence, which is when Shaggy and Scooby go down into the graveyard bar, and they're the skeleton piano player starts playing this song, and all these characters are singing, singing kind of a barroom, pub song, that Shaggy and Scooby would be swept up into this, and they would suddenly, get into the song and be swept away by the ghosts and ghouls singing their Halloween song. And that, I'll always remember that morning that Kevin and I put that together. We had about a half an hour to put this song, for whatever reason, like we were just up against it. We were boarding and talking about all the other stuff we were trying to do, and then we went, oh my gosh, we have this song sequence, we got to get this figured out. And in about a half an hour, Kevin and I just bounced back and forth through post-it notes around and came up with that song sequence. And of course, Kevin comes up with the best gag in the world, where the guy's jaw drops off, when Shaggy and Scooby do their bit at the end, and the piano player's jaw drops and hits the plink and hits the piano. Like those kind of gags, and seeing that come together. It is funny how sometimes in this crazy biz, you will just get lightning in a bottle and it'll happen in 30 minutes. It doesn't sometimes take 3 months to work it out perfectly. We don't have that kind of schedule. So we're like, what if he and I get in a room, knock this thing out? We know what we're trying to do. We know what we're after. Let's just see what comes and I think we wrote it. I was spitting out lyrics and Kevin was drawing and we were making it up. And maybe 30, 40 minutes later was like, okay, we feel like we got something. And we had just had the thumbs, and then Kevin drew it all out and plussed it and made it great. And then one of my favorite bits of that whole thing is you cut to 4 monsters that are singing, and they're just like, it's a mummy and a ghoul, like guys that would can't really talk, and they go rawr, 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 and it was just like stupid funny stuff like that is always a joy. And so it's sort of a blend of, yes, let's do kind of like musical theater, yes, but let's make sure that it's still a gag, it's still a joke. It's not that we're just breaking into song. It's not a song sequence that's, to make you, to float you away on ethereal, take you away on a magical journey. It's is there a funny key underlying joke that we're playing, so that we're not taking it all too seriously. We're still having that fun, and we can just stay goofy and silly. That's always was kind of the big plan.
It's amazing to hear some behind the scenes stories about you working with Kevin because we interviewed him not too long ago and he caught me off guard a bit because he kept referring to the movie as Scooby Doo and the Shadow Goblins. And so doing like
Oh,
research after that, I was like, oh, so that was the original title. So I'm
that
curious to
was.
know, did that have any different story details or story plots, or was it just this is an idea for it and we've changed it later?
Yeah, it was just a title. It was the working title of it. And which is great about the process too, is that you eventually get it in front of somebody like Sander, or maybe it might have been someone in our development team. It's going, this is great, but nobody knows what a shadow goblin is. You don't, you guys know because you're making it. But if you think about the audience, we don't really, what is a shadow goblin? That doesn't have anything we can kind of grab onto. Whereas a Goblin King, you can kind of get your head around what maybe
Yeah.
that is, right? And so that was and the Goblin King was always in it. The story itself didn't change. The story was pretty much the story that I had pitched Sander. But it was just that idea that, how are people going to know what this is about? And I loved that title. Maybe that's why it stuck with Kevin. Because it was Scooby Doo and the Shadow Goblin for the longest time, Shadow Goblins for the longest time. And they refer to themselves as Shadow Goblins, in the Jim Belushi's character, refers to themselves, the little guard goblins, and refers to themselves as shadow goblins. But to have that in the title, it just felt like, we don't really know what that means. So let's pick something that we can grab onto a little bit more, which I thought was great too, because it elevated Tim Curry's character, the Shadow Goblin, up to being, or sorry, the Goblin King, up to the kind of level, the title level, and elevated his character, which is so important in the story. And really, in a way, is the heart of the story when you get down to the end, which I don't want to spoil it for anybody. But I liked the idea that it brought his character forward, and the fact that we got Tim Curry to do the voice of the Goblin King was like, forget about a dream cast, and a dream casting for that character. I saw the movie Legend when I was 16 years old on the big screen. I didn't even know what it was. I just went to the movies that weekend and saw it, and it blew my mind. Tim Curry as Darkness, and just that is a movie that could even be made. And if you'd have told me 20 years later, 30 years later, whatever it was, I would be, no, 20, 25 years later, that I would be, he would be in a studio and doing this character for us. And he was so generous, so fantastic, so creative, and didn't put it, and Tim Curry is an actor who's done a ton of animation voices, and he didn't just pull out a standard character and say, oh, this is the guy you want, this guy. He really gave it heart and growl and grit and tenderness, in the end as well. And I mean, you couldn't ask for a better representation of what we hoped that character could be. It was absolutely a dream casting. To this day, my favorite highlights of my career, unquestionably.
I mean, there's so many reasons that this movie is a standout, from, like you say, the casting was exceptional, to the story, to the music, and so many other things. I can see where you were coming from when you said you were thinking of a feature film, because there is something about this that does take it that step further forward than we're used to seeing. And I know you were saying, in terms of some of the inspiration, you're talking about Alice in Wonderland and The Wizard of Oz. Is there any Halloween movies that you perhaps were drawing inspiration from, or just any parts of Halloween that you've particularly enjoyed that you wanted to try and fit into the movie somehow?
Yeah, I grabbed onto the idea that if kids are walking around in Halloween costumes, that the threat could be that they would all turn into real Halloween monsters. That could be, that could be a thing that could, how could you have a earth-shattering, sort of global threat? If you're gonna go big, you gotta go big or go home here. And if you're gonna go that big, you can't. We did key on, the future prophecy, or the crystal ball, seeing the future, that Fred and Velma and Daphne turn into a witch and a Dracula and a werewolf. And but also that all the Halloween characters, all the kids could get turned into Halloween characters. And so that idea grabbed me, that sense of how do we raise the stakes, what's at stake, and and would allow us, we needed that big of a threat so that we would justify this kooky weaving through all these Halloween tropes, from the headless horseman to the witches to jack-o'-lantern, and the goblins themselves, and all these, and the ghost train that comes out from Mr. All these big things. We went big with these ideas, so we needed a big threat. So that, grabbed onto that, and you always sort of have these visual touchstones, these totems that you kind of grab onto that keep you alive through the production process. And when I was first getting going, and part of that, what was up on that board that I was pitching Sander, all these sort of early development sketch drawings, and the ghost train was up there, and the jack-o'-lantern, what eventually became the jack-o'-lantern character, and the headless horseman, all those, those things were there. And I'm a huge fan of the Legend of Sleepy Hollow from Walt Disney Studios in 1949. That short with Ichabod and Mr. Toad, I saw that when I was like 9 years old. It scared me to death. It was so scary, and yet it was so silly, and it was so fun. And so that also became one of the touchstones I was kind of holding on to. I was like, I always felt like Shaggy and Scooby were very similar to Ichabod and his horse in that short. And if you haven't seen it, especially for Halloween, I really recommend you go check it out and see it again, refresh it. There's a moment, probably maybe 5 minutes of that little movie, where Shaggy, the horse and Ichabod are basically Shaggy and Scooby. Like, they're scrambling, they're trying to get away from the headless horseman, they're playing these gags on them, they're going around the tree, and Ichabod's spinning around the limb. Like, there's all this great stuff happening there, and it's just very much in the vein of Shaggy and Scooby. And so that was sort of my North Star of this movie, was, gee, could we do something, and then getting to do Headless Horseman, and then bringing Kevin up again. Kevin storyboarded that entire Headless Horseman chase, which is like giant highlight, of the movie. It's sort of the middle tent pole, middle of the movie set piece, where Shaggy and Scooby are running away from the headless horseman. He's chasing them down. They're throwing these cards behind them. Each one of them has a spell, and they're just these goofy spells. Wall of Gnome, which is just hilarious. I'm not even sure where these ideas. I don't believe these were in the script. I think we were pulling these up while we were boarding. We're just making stuff up. That's probably Kevin, might have been Sandy, but they, we're coming up with these crazy gags. Baby on a frog, just bizarre, funny, silly stuff right in the middle of what is a pretty scary sequence. And Kevin really treated it. Our goal was like, let's treat the headless horseman like as real as we can. And I think it was even Kevin's idea to, like, what if the headless horseman's the headless horseman's horse is a ghost horse, so that we had never seen that before. It's like a really skinny, scraggly, it's almost bone. It's not a skeleton horse. You've seen that. It's not a full, big, black, healthy demon stallion. We've seen that. Instead, it's this kind of emaciated, dried up, dehydrated, half dead demon horse that's like spooky and scary. And then when the headless horseman like scoops down and picks up jack-o'-lantern and puts him on and like possesses jack-o'-lantern with this crazy flame, like, that's some crazy, scary stuff, right? But Shaggy and Scooby, doing this crazy spells behind them, trying to buy themselves time, takes the edge off of it and keeps it silly. So it was always balancing that, and that's the same balance that you see in that Ichabod and Mr. Toad movie. It's a silly balance against what's really a terrifying and spooky sequence. And so I was kind of always following that breadcrumb back to what I was feeling at 9 years old, watching that, through my eyes like this. I wasn't covering my eyes, I was watching, but I was in that engaged place of I'm scared by this, but I want to see what happens, and I'm on the edge of my seat, and it's so undeniable. I can't not keep watching it. But I hope we didn't push it that far. I think we pushed it maybe a notch or two, not quite as far as they took it. But,
I mean, I must say, I like one of the sayings that you used right at the start of that answer, which was "go big or go home," because I think that's what you needed to do with this movie. And like you say, huge amounts of humor, quite a serious amount of okay, what could actually happen here? A little bit of threat levels also, but also on that supernatural element, because quite often we see Scooby projects that try and make the mystery real and they get some level of pushback and they can't fully go big or go home. You end up with some, reasons that they try and explain it away, but also, it's there, you saw it. Did you ever get any of that pushback? Or, because to me, it very much seems like you were allowed to take this all the way, and that's what makes it good. You didn't have to try and explain any of it away and kind of work your way around it and kind of tiptoe around the edges. This was a great movie. It almost feels like the project you wanted is the project we got.
Yeah, I think the fact that it was Halloween and I could point to the Celtic history of Halloween and the true meaning of Halloween and what it's for and what its cultural beginnings was that we had stayed authentic to that. We weren't pulling something out of thin air or trying to find some sort of technicality workaround that we could justify in retrospect. We started with, no, this is a legitimate cultural beginning of what's turned into a phenomenal holiday. Let's go back to that, uncover that, and make sure that that's super organic and that just naturally flows into our story. And so in a way, the fact that it happened to Shaggy and Scooby was almost incidental. It could have happened to anyone in that world on that night. It just, Shaggy and Scooby wandered into it and got themselves into trouble because they took it upon themselves to screw with the amazing Krudsky in the first place. He's a jerk. There's no question he's a jerk. Right. And he says no dogs allowed, and he flicks Scooby on the nose. And that's the moment we thought, well, now we have a justification for Shaggy and Scooby to go in and prove his magic trick is fake, because they're not allowed to go on the show, so they'll show him. But they did it in good fun but ruined the guy's career and made an enemy for life, unfortunately. But that the being able to go that far with it and being able to push it to that, we definitely had some conversations about Zombie Island and Witch's Ghost and the work that David Davis Doy's movies, the early Scooby, the very first DVD movies that came out of Scooby. They were sort of in that vein, hey, the ghosts are real kind of thing. And so we wanted to steer clear of that, where it wasn't sorcery, witchcraft, and sort of that sort of stuff. We were going into culture, history, the origins of Halloween, and in a way, it was sort of the breadcrumb of the Loch Ness Monster movie, which we went back to Scotland and went back into Celtic history and the history of Scotland and we did a bunch of research to try to make that one feel as lived in as we could. And I felt, to a degree, I always love that world. I love anything sort of coming out of that. So it was almost revisiting some of the sort of that region of the world for their folklore, and in this case the folklore being spirits and will-o-wisps and ghosts and ghouls, and especially goblins. And then you say the word goblin, you've got me. I love that stuff. And so we did skate along for a while going, gee, are they going to keep letting us do this, and do they know what we're doing? And I will tell a funny story that I felt like I had pulled it off, and I had a version of it, and we hadn't shown it to the world yet. We hadn't come out on DVD. It's probably still 3 or 4 months before it was going to be released in the stores. And I went over for an overnight with another family that had invited us up to like their house in the mountains, and we went up with them. They had little kids, and I think their son at that point was probably 8 or 9, and we showed them Goblin. We're like, listen, this is you haven't seen this is a movie, no one in the whole world has seen this movie, you're the first one to watch it. And we watch it, we're all watching together, eating popcorn, we're having a great time. It seems like the kids are loving it. We get over, and I turn and I go, so what do you think? And he said, well, I like it, but it's not really like a Scooby movie. And I was like, oh, I was devastated. I was like, oh no. I was like, I broke it. I failed. And so I always remember that going, people might watch this expecting it to be a certain thing, right? Pull the mask off and and the monster's not real. And so I felt a little bad at that point. I felt, oh, maybe I did blow it, and then, and then here 15 years later, I don't know. I honestly don't know where it's landed. Maybe you guys can tell me. I don't know what the in the canon of all the Scooby movies that have come before and come after, where it lands with people. But I remember that feedback, and it was the first feedback I got that from a kid. And I was like, oh no, I'm dead.
I mean, there's so many reasons why it stands out. I think it ages better each year because I think with the way that they're running things at the moment, we've got, say, like you mentioned, the Zombie Island movie, and then we had a sequel semi-recently, which almost bent over backwards to retcon the fact that all of that stuff didn't really happen and it was fake. And so I think for all that, I don't have a problem with Supernatural Scooby, and I also don't have a problem with Pull the Mask Off Scooby. I think with the way that the most fans are perceiving things is the forced non-supernatural is getting quite frustrating. So something like Goblin King is almost like a breath of fresh air to come back to in that era when stuff like that was allowed. So I think it's aged better and will continue to age better.
Oh, I'm glad to hear that. I really haven't very much stayed up with the more recent movies, and I don't want to really say anything, about anybody else's work, but I do definitely not ever. I've never been sort of interested in this any sort of self-referential, commenting within the show on this, that, or the other, pointing out that we've done over 300 ghosts, that piece. I think I did that in Chill Out Scooby Doo, that, Shaggy and Scooby were monster bait, and LaFleur, captured them because everywhere they go, they always get caught up with monsters. That's the only thing I think I ever did that I can remember that was sort of in that vein. But I think it's better just to let each story stand on its own, and just, rather than make a big deal that something is or something isn't. This is the movie, this is the story, this is the show of this story, and let's just stay in the moment and stay authentic with it, and let Shaggy and Scooby's character evoke their response to it out of the nature of their characters, not out of sort of a reference to pop culture or a reference to their standing, as a long-standing beloved property. Just let them be Shaggy and Scooby, let them tell you what they're going to say. And 9 times out of 10, they're just trying to get out of it. They're just trying to get out of having to deal with it at all. And I think that's, for me, has always been enough. And whether we put them in, a big rubber costume chasing them around, or an extravaganza, supernatural extravaganza, as long as they are always together and they're always supporting each other and never throwing each other the bus or trying to survive at the expense of the other, as long as they're a representative of friends, how true friends would always work with each other through anything, then you can throw anything at them, and they're going to act and respond comedically out of their own response to whatever scenario they're in. It's less about the scenario, and it's more about them as funny characters. What is Shaggy and Scooby Doo going to do in this? Like, one of my favorite gags, I mean, of all time, is Shaggy and Scooby, talking the werewolf bouncer into that they are actually a werewolf. That Scooby goes up into Shaggy's shirt, which is very, good gag for us. Like, he's hiding from him, and then Shaggy gets the idea, wait, and his arms go in, his head disappears, and his shirt's just there, and then the shirt's doing this. And when the shirt's doing this, I mean, in my head, I'm like, oh, they're talking it out. They're figuring out what they're going to do. That's like the juicy part of the gag. Like, and then Scooby pops out, and his arms and head and Shaggy's legs, and he fluffs up his fur and pretends he's a werewolf. I'm like, that's the fun of them creatively in the moment coming up with some way to get themselves out of this jam that they're in and get over that next level. And that's a really important part, moment and milestone in Goblin King, because that's the threshold guardian. That's the guy that is standing, classic, storytelling structure, this threshold that they're supposed to, they're trying to get past this threshold into the adventure. He's the guy literally stopping them from going on the rest of the way. And in fact, he's going to kill them. He says, time for a late night snack. And he's about to get them, because Mr. Gibbles pushes them on to the ghost train, right? This is all passive. Everything they're doing is passive until that moment. That's their first active moment where they engage in the Shaggy Scooby comedy genius of each other. And they, on their own accord, get past that guy. And when that happens, now they're into it. Now they're in on the adventure. Everything until then, they've been riding a wave that they were just naturally on. But this was them proactively moving the story forward and getting them expanded in their own sense of what they're capable of. And I just, even though it's a little moment, it's just one little gag, I always loved that story moment because it gets them, over that first obstacle and whisks them away on the whole adventure.
Yeah, that is fantastic because I think one of the things that stands out with Goblin King is the attention to detail. And I agree that things are almost better in their own self-contained story because then you don't need to be bogged down worrying about what is canon or isn't canon, who won't return, who will return. But if there's one thing that I do wish was carried over throughout the Scooby Doo that we get more now and even continuing then as well, it's how elaborate the opening titles were because it doesn't surprise me at all to mention that you wanted this to be on the big screen because that opening title sequence is so cinematic from all the visual Easter eggs that we get, but also the fact that all the unit directors get animated into like their own like caricatures there. I think that's amazing. What was it like to come up with some of those concepts for the opening titles?
Yeah, well, thank you. I really appreciate that. And I storyboarded that sequence myself. And I think that's probably the only sequence I myself took as the overall producer. We always hand it off to the crew, and I'm there sort of trying to help everybody do everything. But there's the main titles are always sort of the thing that's waiting to kind of bite you. And because you're so focused on making the movie, there is going to be a point at which our fabulous line producer Vera Morales would turn around, in every movie and go, "Oh, by the way, we got to do the main title." And you're like, "Oh gosh, the main title. We got to finish Act 1, and I'm over here. I'm trying to finish up the sequence on Act 2, and how are we going to get this main title done?" So I think this was the one instance where I had sort of anticipated that happening. And so as we were going through the production, I sort of got a chance. I sort of noodled on it, throughout like the first third of the production or so. I didn't do it all at one sitting. I thought about it, I noodled on it. Once we had the idea that, oh, they're going to be riding, and that the opening shot when they're, you're going down the rail and you see the Goblin King's mouth open and you go into the Goblin King, like that's taking us into the story. And I loved that moment. So that once I had that shot, I knew that was the first shot of the sequence. Everything else was kind of came pretty organically. Oh, they're taking a ride, and what can we reference, and how can we show Shaggy and Scooby are having fun, and everybody else is kind of scared. And that whole bit was about nothing scares Shaggy. So they know it's fake. Velma and Daphne and Fred are like, whoa, and Velma gets like motion sickness coming off of it, but Shaggy and Scooby, like they're, you cut to them, they're jumping in a bouncy house after that opening sequence. And they're like, what, are you kidding me? That was the easiest thing. So I loved that idea that this was a spooky ride that they, though they were completely blasé about it, not knowing that this was foreshadowing this whole trip that they were going to be taking into the magical world. And I do remember when Vera finally did show up on my door with the dreaded knock and say, "Oh, by the way, we're supposed to do this main title," and I had it done for a week or two probably by then, and I had it all clipped and storyboarded and photocopied, and the entire board was done, and it was binder clipped, and it was not super thick. It's probably only that thick, it's not that big of a sequence. And I was like, "Oh, this," and I just handed it to her, and she just grabbed it and looked at me and turned and walked out. And so that was the one instance where it didn't get us. We were able to turn around and go, "I thought this one through this time." But I really appreciate you bringing that up because that was a fun sequence, and I thought the animators animated it beautifully. It's a lot of stuff in that sequence to be able to produce well, and I thought it turned out really nice.
Yeah, it's definitely like my favorite of the Scooby-Doo opening titles of all of that going on. And I guess we've spoken a bit about Tim Curry as the Goblin King, and that's amazing. But we've also got, Hayden Panettiere as the fairy and Wayne Knight as the amazing Krudsky. So there's just so many people that it's literally a star-studded cast, unlike any other Scooby-Doo movie. And I think even including some of the ones that have been on the big screen as well. So this is really a jam-packed cast. How much did you work with some of the guest stars? Like, were there any instances where they recorded with the rest of the cast? And if so, Do you have any like behind the scenes stories with any of them that you can
Oh,
share?
sure. Well, some of it, most of them, we recorded singularly. Having Jay Leno as the jack-o'-lantern, and he was great. He came in and absolutely gave us all this energy and made that character so fun. And who knew Jay Leno would do a voice, and it, you could tell it's Jay Leno, but the personality of Jack is really this boisterous, hey, kind of guy. I'm just out here having a party. I'm here to have a good time, because his and that's part of the stakes of the movie too, is that Jack's candle, he dies when that candle goes out. He's not here for a long time. He's here for a good time, So having that energy. But the funny thing about Jay Leno, he came in and he said, hey, tell me what you want, and so we kind of pitched this character to him, and he delivered that character. But the funny thing was, he go, Jay, I kind of like that. Could you do it like this? And he go, give him a line read or ask him for a little direction, and he delivered the character, pretty much the same way. I'm like, all right, we're just gonna let him do what he does, which was both awesome and kind of funny. It was just like, he's doing great. Let's just let him do his thing. If there's something really super specific we need, but as long as it's got this energy, he's Jay Leno. Let Jay do what Jay's gonna do. And he was generous. He was charming and funny in that role. And walked across the street from NBC, where he was doing the Tonight Show at the time, walked across the street to Warner Brothers Studios, did the bit and left. And then getting Lauren Bacall as the witch, getting Lauren, but unfortunately she wasn't in studio. I think she was in New York, and so we had her patched in over a direct line, and so we were just hearing her voice. She was fabulous and totally delightful. I mean, the fact you could get Lauren Bacall to come in and do a voice for you, that was extraordinary. Having Wallace Shawn from The Princess Bride as Mr. Gibbles, and have him sing a song, which he was in Los Angeles, and so we came to the recording studio of our fantastic music composer Thomas Chase, and he was in Tom Chase's home studio in Sherman Oaks. And there you have Wallace Shawn, and we're walking him through this big musical number that he's doing, and he just nailed it, right? And we just did it kind of line by line, piece by piece. He's not a guy that's really known for doing musical theater, but he grabbed onto it and had a great time with it, and really understood the joke that it's a sales pitch. He's telling the story, but he's trying to sell them on buying stuff at his magic store. He pulls $1 out of Scooby's ear. He's doing all this kind of funny stuff that's around commerce. And so that performance was the fact that you could get Wallace Shawn to come in, and then the Amazing Krudsky with Wayne Knight, who was lucky enough to work again with Wayne Knight on the Legend of the Three Caballeros that we did at Disney, which is on Disney Plus now, plug. But he's also our villain in that show, and he's always fantastic and always fabulous and such a joy to work with. And he really makes, you really can't stand that guy that he plays, but you follow the arc of the Amazing Krudsky. He's miserable, and he's poor me. He's just, the world is just, everyone is just always on my case. I can never win. And he finally gets a little taste of power, and it just goes completely to his head. And the way that Wayne ramps that character up from this kind of miserable, down in his luck, crap magician, to somebody who's on the verge of having all power, and to still keep that comedy, keep that comedic kind of thing that he does, as he's trying to struggle to learn how to become this powerful sorcerer, is just completely extraordinary, and was a delight to direct and see what he would do with that character. And then the real joy was having Jim Belushi and Larry Joe Campbell come in together. They came in to play the two Shadow Goblin guards together, and they had been on a show together where they were friends. I believe it was according to Jim. It's been quite a while, but they were castmates on a sitcom, and they had just had a great a chemistry with each other. And the show had been off the air for a year or two, I think. At that point, they hadn't seen each other since they had been on that show. So they came in to play these roles together, and they're playing off each other in real time. You know, those guys, they're always arguing with each other and getting into fights with each other. So that was all happening in the studio together, and we just told them to improv, you know, fight with each other and get into it. And to see them sort of play off each other and have the comedic timing that they had already used so many times in their live action show was great to take that and bring that and inject that into Goblin King. And then of course Jim Belushi singing the Goblin Boogie. I mean, to have Jim Belushi come in and sing a boogie woogie song with a goblin theme, completely insane, right? And he nailed it. You know, we worked through the song. The composer Tom Chase was there in the studio with us, and you know, we walked through what we were trying to get done, where the ins and outs were. He got it right away. I think we did it in like 2 or 3 takes, and we were done. Yeah, it was that, you know, look at that cast and go, how do you get these folks to come in on a little Scooby Doo DVD movie? But that's again the power of Scooby. You know, everybody loves Scooby at some point, has had some connection to these characters, and so it was always surprising who we could get. But I really did feel like on Goblin King we hit the mother load. We got just such a great cast.
Yeah, I guess to that end, I'll ask, when you were writing some of the characters that these people would go on to play, did you ever have them in mind, or like a wish list of who you could get for those roles? And if so, like after, say, you knew you'd got Tim Curry as the Goblin King, would that involve like, okay, now I'm going to do some rewrites because I can really lean into the strengths of Tim Curry, for example?
Yeah, I think I had Tim Curry in mind when we were doing the first writing, because he was doing quite a bit of animation voices at that time, and I felt like that's someone we could get. And so that you know, giving a character that kind of gravitas and that presence that's in the Goblin King, certainly I you know, when we wrote, say, Jack-o'-lantern, we didn't have any idea we could get Jay Leno, and when we wrote The Witch, we didn't have any idea that we could get Lauren Bacall. And the same with the 2 goblins. I mean, you know, didn't anticipate we'd get Larry Joe Campbell and Jim Belushi. So, you know, and so many times by the time you're that far down the road, you know, your script is pretty well, you know, locked. You might screw around and play a little bit in the recording, but more or less, you know, what you're trying to get done. And when you do, you know, finally get to those couple of weeks where you get a hold of the casting team and we start putting ideas about, you know, who or what or when we can get, that can sometimes inform like, oh, you know, this person, we think we can you know, we can adjust maybe how we're thinking about the character. And certainly on the day, if there's, you know, a line that's kind of overwritten or the rhythm isn't working there, the actors are always given that freedom to put it in a rhythm and a cadence that they, you know, that they think will work best. You know, Mr. Gibbles, getting Wallace Shawn to do Mr. Gibbles, I mean, that totally changed, you know, how you would kind of treat that character. You know, that he would be this kind of nebbishy, you know, unthreatening in a way kind of character was so great, because that, you know, that is the counterpart to the Goblin King. You know, Mr. Gibbles is sort of the light version of what the Goblin King becomes. You know, he's the light wizard, and Krudsky, you know, getting the Goblin Scepter becomes the dark version of that. So, you know, you think of Wallace Shawn and Wayne Knight, you know, they're sort of, you know, they're sort of 2 sides of the same coin. They're both kind of nebbish, kind of like little you know, guys, in, you know, in their voice, that personality kind of comes through. But the you know, the actual casting of them and then seeing them go and perform it, that does inform, and it also informs character design, because we're recording early, you know, we get the script going and then we're recording as we're getting character designs going. So once we kind of knew, you know, what the character of the voices were, that starts to inform the design process. And so you get, you know, this, you know, the body shape, say, of Mr. Gibbles, you know, he's not a kind of tall, lean, you know, Gandalf kind of character. He's a short stature, you know, kind of more rounded, you know, person. And same with Krudsky, right? His Krudsky is, you know, once we knew we had Wayne Knight, okay, we want this kind of, you know, a thicker, heavy set kind of guy, and that but also that, you know, that voice is going to inhabit that character, and that physical resonance, that physical instrument is going to be a good match. That physical representation of that character is going to be a good match for that voice, because you can see, you know, you can see and feel that voice coming out of that character, and it informs the story, and it gives us different, you know, different types of silhouettes and design elements to play off of each other, so that characters are really recognizable at a glance, at an instant, you know who you're looking at. So that the way that this whole process informs itself as it goes, it is crazy that it just starts with a few sketches and a script, and then you start to break that down, and then all the layers that come in and start to affect how it goes, you know, in a lot of ways are somewhat out of your control in the best possible way. It's like, oh my gosh, I couldn't, you know, Wallace Shawn's going to be Mr. Gibbles. That's a no-brainer, you know, that you're done. You're not thinking, oh yeah, but we could also get so-and-so. You're thinking, no, you're not even thinking that at all. You're thinking, no, that's our guy. I can't believe we can get him. And let's design specifically around that.
I mean, it certainly was perfect. And it sounds like there's been so many amazing highlights for you through working on this movie. Is, you know, from you know, all the guest stars to working on those opening credits, the opening titles. Is there a particular moment from this project that stands out to you as perhaps a favorite?
Oh my gosh. Well, I did love when the Ghost Train was fully realized, because we were still kind of in the early days of using CG in 2D, and the fact that design could come through, and then that sequence, which was boarded by Mario Diana, who is a fantastic director now on Bob's Burgers. Mario has been working in animation for many years. He boarded that entire sequence. Jim Stentrum did the character designs for the conductor and the engineer, and the way that came out, when, you know, we had iterated that early on the big sketchboard, what I was pitching at the early days of it, knowing that was the taking off point into the adventure. You know, that the way that came out, that was so fully realized, and that sequence was so entertaining thanks to Mario's brilliant boarding of it. And then, you know, that was a highlight. I think the goblins all flying out of the castle as the Goblin King is like doing this, you know, and fly, you know, which is very Wicked Witch of the West, you know, fly my monkeys. The fact, you know, the way that they come out at midnight, the way that the walls separate and they go out, like seeing all that, those kinds of things come to life, like these big set piecey things that, you know, are kind of the visual, you know, injections of energy into the story. When those things are fully animated and you see them on screen for the first time, and you know, you write them and you have this idea of this, the board guys take it over, and they you know, they extrapolate out from there, and then you really see, you know, you see the full execution of it, but you've lived it every step of the way too, because you've, you know, let's talk about the background design and the background painting in this show as well, which was absolutely phenomenal. Rosalina Tuchev and Tristan Cole were our background painters, and we had Marina Levikova designing on it. And oh my gosh, oh my gosh, I'm blanking on everybody's name. I should have looked at the credits. Anyway, but such great designers working, and then such great painters following up behind them. And so you're seeing these background designs. So the character designs are one thing, and the voice actors are one thing, and then the realization of that world and the rendering and presentation of that world. I always, you know, for example, I loved the idea of the fairy city. When they make it to the fairy city, I had something completely different in mind, and our background designer Marina came up and said, well, let me pitch you something else. And she had done this drawing where there were these kind of glowing balls of leaves that, like, if the fairies had taken leaves and made little houses out of them. It was such a fabulous idea. You know, it was a ideal concept that you know was out of nowhere, and was such a better idea than sort of this, you know, I don't know, wooded little mushroom village or whatever I was thinking. You know, she brought it to this totally other sort of unexpected place. And I think that when you get to, you know, that unexpected presentation of a visual idea, and then it's painted, and then you see that fully realized and animated and incorporated into the story. And that scene is such an important follow-up to Kevin Altieri's amazing broomstick ride that Shaggy and Scooby go through, right? When they go crashing through the haunted house and up over the hills, and they get shot down by the goblin blaster that these two idiot goblins are shooting at them. And then they crash, and it's like that you're going for this really dramatic high point, this actiony high point full of, blues, dark blues and greens and night colors. And they wake up and they're in this whole other color palette. They're in this whole other feel. The vibe change there is really significant, and it's important that we hit that, because you got to take a breath. I mean, we just been through this incredible wild sequence, and we got to give the audience a chance to catch up a little bit. And they're also, this is right before we're going to go take our final assault on Act 3 and head for the Goblin Castle. So you need a little moment where you're warm and you're cozy and you're with the fairies, and you're given that little chance to take a break. You're given a little chance to even worry about Broomy, who's broken and in a crater at that point, and it's this low point at the same time as at this moment to take a break. And so seeing, I always remember when I first saw the designs for that, and then saw that where that landed in the picture, that's the sort of joy of it. I could never have foreseen that, and so things like that constantly happen in the process. And you're just lucky when you just have the right people that we've all worked together for so many years, and being able to see the crew and the team take on ownership of an idea themselves and put their best into it, and then see that fully realized. That's the whole joy of this as a collaborative medium, that we're doing this together, and there's room for ideas, there's room for concepts. And the best thing you can do as a director or a team member is to say yes when someone brings you a great idea. That's the easiest advice you can possibly give anybody. When someone gives you a great idea, say yes.
I mean, this one's certainly filled with great ideas. I mean, something you were mentioning earlier, the scene where Shaggy and Scooby disguise themselves as the werewolf is almost like, I don't know, kind of a key point of going into this. How fun this is about to be, and just, I think it was a really clever idea. And on that, do you kind of know where that idea came from? Was it just something that came to you? Was it perhaps inspiration taken from the Reluctant Werewolf movie, or?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it was we just came from gags. Like, you tried to think about, okay, we got our thread, right? We know the story that we're going to tell. Now, what are the entertaining bits? We call a bit, right? What's the bit? How are we going to make a gag out of something? And I'm always accused of making a meal out of everything, right? Like, I want to make gags and gags of bit. I'll play a bit all day long, and eventually you got to cut off, the bits and not overdo it. But my mentor, Iwo Takamoto, who was the original designer and creator and first director of the original Scooby Doo series, he really took me under his wing and taught me the secrets of the Scooby world. And the biggest thing he ever taught me was the connecting of the dots of a bit, that things happen on a continuum, and you're building the laughs, you're building it up. So you don't just randomly do bits everywhere. It ties to something else and connects to something else and sets up the next gag, so that you get this build and a connected through line of even when you're sort of doing gags. And so if you'll notice, like the through line of gags is for Shaggy and Scooby, there's like a meta gag over the whole thing, which is them shape-shifting, right? And that was one of the pieces of DNA that we held on for Goblin King, was as we went through and picked out different sort of genres of spooks and specters that the gang could each be. And so we chose a werewolf for Velma, we chose a vampire for Fred, and we had Daphne as a witch. And if you'll see in the first opening carnival sequence, they stick their heads through a photo cutout, and there's a vampire, there's a werewolf, and there's a witch, and Daphne and Velma and Fred all are in those selected characters. And then later in the movie, they turn into those, right? So for Shaggy and Scooby, though, we thought, well, they need to go through all of these different permutations and this adventure. They're going to be shapeshifters. So we chose shapeshifting, which is a form of specter and ghoul, right? So they'll be shapeshifters. That's why they're, they do the werewolf bit. They do the magic card bit at the beginning when they become these monsters as their cover to get onto the ghost train and travel into the spirit world without being noticed. And then they take it, and then they take it before they go into the goblin castle, and they make their transformation. And so this whole idea that they're shape-shifting was always the gag that we were playing with them as he kind of went along. So we never really wanted them sitting still too long, and that was the connected through line for their character. So it wouldn't ever feel like these things were kind of coming out of nowhere. It was all about, can they pass for just denizens of the magic world when they're clearly out of their depth here in the magic world? How can they make it through? Well, they have to take on the look, and it's just a long extended version of Luke and Han trying to get onto the Death Star disguised as stormtroopers, right? It's just one gag about that all the way through the movie, of them trying to fit in, trying to go unnoticed, trying to complete their mission before their whatever they're under gives out.
That's incredible. And this might be a bit of a difficult question to answer now, but do you have a favorite song from the Goblin King?
Well, Goblin Oogie Woogie, you just can't do any better than that. Kyle Menke, who's an incredible storyboard artist, did that entire sequence. And Kyle is just a phenomenal artist. He was with us on Loch Ness as well. I'm always thrilled anytime I can get Kyle to do anything on any project I'm on. And he took on that sequence. And we say, okay, there's going to be about 1,000 goblins, dancing with Shaggy and Scooby, in this giant, and the inspiration of that, the Sleeping Beauties goblins that were designed by Bill Peet, and they're dancing around the fire as their shadows are up against the wall. I mean, that was really the inspiration in a lot of ways for that the feeling, right, the atmosphere inside the Goblin Castle of that. Okay, this is you're deep in the heart of the belly of the beast here, and they're having this big goblin party, and what are you going to do? And then for I don't even know where we came up with the idea to make it an Oogie Boogie kind of ragtime rollicking song. I'm sure it came from Tom Chase, who was just our brilliant composer, and Tom and I worked together on all of my Scooby movies, and we always just had such a collaborative and rich working relationship. So somewhere along the lines we came up with, I think we probably, like usual, painted ourselves into a corner. We probably got into act 3 and went, what are we going to do now? Like, how do we, and what can we do to blow the socks off this thing? I have no doubt that Tom probably played me a sample and said, well, I'm kind of thinking something like this, and he must have played something like that, and we hit on, okay, Goblin Oogie Boogie, you couldn't go wrong. And then Jim Belushi performing that was fantastic. Well, actually, and you know what, I gotta go back. I said I only storyboarded the title sequence, but I actually storyboarded Mr. Gibble's song. So I actually did that myself. So I have a soft spot for that song sequence just because I storyboarded it, and I loved his performance of that. But I think the scale and the goofiness and the place in the movie where the Goblin Oogie Boogie happens is so, like, you're on the edge of your seat, like, what's going to happen? We don't know what's going to happen. And then they get sucked into this idiotic dance sequence where the goblins are dancing with them. I just, it's too much. It's too much fun. And then Jim Belushi's performance of it, the fact that he just grabbed onto it and went with it. And I believe that we were really running low on time. Like, we were toward the end of the movie. I think it was one of the last sequences that we storyboarded and got into the movie. I remember actually we had this is like 2005, 2006, 2007. Like, computers were not what they are today. Like, we were rendering the animatics like as fast as we could, and I think we had WB executives coming to see it, and we were like literally doing like 10 minutes at a time. Like, they were in a room and we were like sending quick times like every 10 minutes or every like 20 minutes or something rendering, and we were just like, there was so much kind of last minute getting it ready to go. And I think that was one of the last sequences that we dropped in. And then you dropped that in, and in a movie that's kind of as big as this and has as much going on, then you really got to have something that injects that energy at the end, because you've promised people all along this is going somewhere. And and when you get them there, and like Shaggy and Scooby have infiltrated, and they're down there and they're in goblin drag, right? And they're this is like the act 3 big moment, and to be able to pull the rug a little bit and play a joke and say, we're going to be silly, we're not going to take this seriously, we're going to have a fun high energy time, right on the cusp of it turning midnight, right on the cusp of the ticking clock blowing up, and the mission failing, to have Shaggy and Scooby like be biting their nails and freaking out that the time is running out, and these idiot goblins are singing this song and dancing with them in the pit, and they just got to get away just so they got to try to get, Scooby's reaching for the goblin scepters, trying to get it. I mean, to me, that's so delicious. I just, that's one of my favorite sequences ever.
There is certainly something special about the music in this movie, and I know every time you said the words Halloween night in this interview, I've started mentally singing. I think it's one of the first things you said. You were talking about people being able to go trick-or-treating tomorrow night, and instantly you went, oh, on Halloween night. And from the start of you entering the Zoom, I have been singing these songs. But yeah, they certainly are amazing. And is there anything you can think of from this movie that's perhaps a little Easter egg, or something you were quite keen to include that maybe people haven't picked up on because they're like subtle references to something, or anything that you think's worth pointing out, or that people might not have noticed that they might like to know?
Yeah, well, in the Mr. Gibble's song sequence, there's a knight, a suit of armor that comes to life, and that is the knight from What a Night for a Night, which is the very first Scooby Doo movie ever. So we used that model. We got the model sheet out of the Hanna-Barbera archives, and so Mr. Gibbles is making magic everywhere, and everything's kind of coming to life, and they turn around, and then this suit of armor comes up, and there's a sword, and it's gonna strike Shaggy and Scooby, and Mr. Gibbles shoots it with the wand, and the knight's body armor explodes and falls down in front of Shaggy and Scooby. So that was an Easter egg. That was the original first Scooby Doo villain ever. And then in the What Goes Bump in the Night song, in the tavern, there is the werewolf and the creeper and the mummy, and I think one more character. I'd have to look up but when they go rawr, 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 those are classic Scooby monsters from the original series. So we peppered in old models from the old show kind of wherever we could. I think those are the instances I can think of. But I loved that we used that night, because I always loved that episode when I was first doing my Scoobies, and we were doing What's New Scooby Doo. What's New Scooby Doo. Going back and watching those again and again and again. That first sometimes you just get it right in the first episode, and that very first episode of Scooby just sets the tone for what has turned into I don't know how many year now legacy of this property. And you go back and watch it, it still completely holds up and is charming, and so I loved that we got a chance to do that, a little bit of homage.
Yeah, I mean, it's certainly fun to see these references, and it's great to hear that it was confirmed that it was, like you say, you'd gone back to the original art sheet and everything. And another question that I would like to ask is, this interview is scheduled to go out on Halloween. This is our Halloween special. And with that in mind, is there any spooky movies, either Scooby or otherwise, that you can recommend people watching on Halloween?
Wow. Yeah. My gosh, what a question, Millie. What am I supposed to do?
Yeah, it kind of puts you on the spot a little bit.
You got me on the spot here. I'm not a horror movie person at all. I can't do it. I can't do horror movies. But I like spooky movies for sure. I want to go see Five Nights at Freddy because it's PG-13. I think it'll be safe for my delicate sensibilities. And well, self-servingly, we just, as a family, my daughter who's 15 now, she just asked if we could watch Loch Ness Monster, Scooby Loch Ness, which I haven't seen. I haven't seen it in 15 years, right? So I was like, I watched it because she wanted something spooky that had that feel, that fun spooky, and so we watched it, and it was so refreshing because I could finally watch it with so much distance now. I could just enjoy it. I didn't have to think about all the shots and things I would have done differently. I used to look at that movie and go, oh my gosh, I'm only half done with it. There's so many things I want to still do. And I went, oh, nobody cares. It's fine. It works great. Knock yourself out. So I would recommend, self-servingly, I would recommend seeing Loch Ness, Scooby Doo and the Loch Ness Monster, just because it's got that kind of Celtic spooky vibe that so well fits kind of Halloween and the foggy moors and stuff. If I could think of one that's not self-serving, Wizard of Oz is I guess it's more maybe Thanksgiving. Traditionally in the United States they used to run it around Thanksgiving, but that's got a serious Halloween spooky vibe, obviously, with the witches and stuff. That's just one of my all-time favorites. That's also cliche. So you didn't say in your question, Millie, could you think of some cliche movies that you could point out? But that's all I've got for you. I'm nothing but cliches.
No, they're brilliant. And I would definitely recommend the Loch Ness to anybody, regardless of the time of year. I think we'd been in Scotland maybe 15 minutes and we pulled into a services and saw a calendar with with like 12 different castles on the back, one for each month of the year. And we were like taking pictures of it, trying to work out if one of it was one of the ones you'd mentioned in the interview. So literally not been in Scotland for 15 minutes and our brain was already on the Loch Ness movie. So any time of the year, I would 100% would recommend that.
Yeah, and I need to rewatch The Wizard of Oz as well, because when we spoke to Christopher Keenan, he kind of set us on this Easter egg trail that in all that era Scooby Doo movies, there's a Wizard of Oz Easter egg in. So I want to task to try and find all of those.
That's very Christopher. Always like, well, there's even in Goblin King, Krudsky comes through the curtain and says, I'm gonna get you for this, and he closes the curtain, he comes back, he says, and your big dog too, and your little dog too, which is the classic line from get you and your little dog too. So we did and your big dog too. So yeah, it's always peppered out somewhere. But yeah, that's Christopher's signature, is finding. But that that just speaks to the power and the terror of the impact of that movie. For all of its technical wizardry and stuff, the structure of it and the performances and the terror and the glory. I mean, it just does have it all. And if you haven't seen it in a while, it holds up. It is well worth a revisit.
I mean, I think it's fair to say this is the greater era of Scooby. I mean, to be able to have these conversations, you'd think that this was the most recent Scooby project that just came out. For you to be able to pull all this.
Because, so you've worked on, like 6 or 7 Scooby Doo things. We've been speaking for just over an hour about one. I feel like we could do an episode like this per Scooby Doo movie.
I promise
you will be sick of the sight of us at that rate.
I promise
if you guys haven't noticed, I will talk endlessly. I will endlessly talk about this with you. I'm glad anybody cares at all. I will share. Go ahead, Millie.
No, I was gonna say, I promise you, 15 minutes ago, I had that same thought of, I really could do this for the Loch Ness movie. I definitely could do this for the Loch Ness movie.
Well, it's so much fun to go back and revisit and to see it, and all these things do come rushing back. And what you don't know maybe is how much you're biting your nails when you're making these things. You don't have any idea that this is going to work out. Every one of these, you think it's going to be a complete failure. That's why I told that story of showing it to the first little kid that ever saw it. It was like, it's not really Scooby. I'm like, oh God, I'm dead, And it wasn't until, after it came out, and until you guys just let me know, that maybe now it's all okay. But you're living and dying, and you never get any feedback. I mean, this was a different era. Like, there wasn't the Reddit, there wasn't the immediate Reddit threads and Amazon reviews and things that back in the day when we made these, there was no way to get really audience feedback. You don't know if people really liked it, other than it either they bought it in the store or they didn't, and you saw sales numbers. But there was no real feedback mechanism for hearing back. Actually, it's funny because since we just watched Loch Ness for its spooky Halloween vibe, I got it on Amazon Prime, bought my own movie, and but I had never seen any reviews, and I saw like, there were like 3,000 5-star reviews, and I was like, what? And so I did the thing I never do, is I went down and started reading the reviews, and it was, it was just, the best part was reading people who were saying, I loved this when I was a kid, and now my kids are watching it and they're loving it. Like, reading that someone who was, 9 when it came out now has a 3 or 4-year-old, which the math works. It was that long ago. And that they're sharing it with their family, that they always enjoyed these movies. That is the thing that, I never heard or never knew. And so, I definitely spend a night I probably read maybe 20, 30, 40, 150 to 200 to 1,000. No, I don't know how many reviews there were, but, I read as many as that they would give me, and they were, all positive. And that just, that made me start to think, now 20 years on, okay, maybe these are okay. Maybe these hit the mark, or they definitely did their job, which was, could they bring people joy? Could they bolster the appreciation and love for what Scooby was started at, about the, love between two, a couple of characters who love and have friendship with each other, and that Scooby stays Scooby, and that Scooby is about love. And that was what Iwo, my mentor, who created Scooby, really always said, was everyone loves a big dumb dog. It's love. Like, that's the heart of Scooby is love. And that, you sprinkle all the spooky on top of it, but the safety is in Shaggy and Scooby, and particularly in Scooby, will always, come from a place of love. And there's no greater force on the planet, and no more important thing to try to promote. So when I read these, this so many years on, that these movies have held, and that people have enjoyed them and passed them to a second generation, I just, I thank Iwo for making these. And I got a little sliver of my career, a chance to play in this sandbox with these characters. And I felt, I will tell one more story about the making of Goblin King, in that when, I was preparing the big presentation boards for Sander, and Iwo, who was not doing so great then, his health was failing, and he was going to the doctor a lot. I hadn't seen him a lot, and he was in the office, he was in the studio, and he came over to knock on my door. I said, what are you doing? And I said, well, I'm working on this, I'm trying to get this feature going, I'm trying to do this thing. And he's like, well, show it to me. And I was like, any opportunity, that Iwo would come and ask what I was doing, and take a look at it, help me figure some things out. So I jumped around the room for 45 minutes and pitched him the story, what was going on. And, Iwo was very much, he was a Japanese descent, and very much a gentleman, and in many ways a samurai, that very sort of very stoic and in a way hard to read sometimes surface, but very exacting and very high standards for his own work and anything that he did, which is why everything you ever look at that he does is just beautiful and brilliant. And at this point, this is my 4th Scooby movie. So for 3 years, I've been running back and forth across the hallway with him making a Scooby movie. And I would make a movie, and I'd show it to Iwo, and he'd go, yeah, I see what you're trying to do here, but I would have done this. And I'm like, and I'd run back across the hallway, and I'd make another movie, and I'd show him sometimes, but he wouldn't really like engage that much. He was more like, you had to like draw it out of him, and so I'd knock on his door and say, what do you think of this? And he'd kind of give me some help every now and then, but I would, show the finished movies to him. And in this case, I was walking him through the whole pre-plan of the movie before we'd made it. And, for the first time, and, was not very forthcoming with compliments. He was from a different generation. It wasn't really all about boosting your confidence that often, it was more pointing out, and rightly so, where you need to be and make improvements. But he sat back and he looked at what I was trying to do, and he said, and he looked at the story, and he went, I think you got something here. Which I'd never heard him say that at all about anything I ever did. He only ever said, I see what you're trying to do. But, in this case, he said, I think you got something here. And then he asked me, and he knew I was trying to do a feature, and I'll share this. And I don't share it often, but I'll share it here. He said, And he came, Ewo came out of Disney Feature. He was on Lady and the Tramp, and he was at, he's Milt Kahl's assistant animator for 20 years. So he was with one of the world's greatest animators and as his assistant, right-hand man at the Disney studio many, many years. And he asked me, do you know what the difference is between a television show and a feature? And I said, I'm going to attempt to answer that. And he said, a feature gives you something to take home in your pocket. TV show is just kind of fun and disposable, but a movie gives you something that you take home in your pocket. And you might think about it in a week as the weeks roll on, and a couple of weeks later, you go, oh, that still thing kind of stuck with me. And he said he thought, what we had here had some of that. And what that was that Jack, in the middle of the movie, when he drops off Shaggy and Scooby at the witch's hut and leaves them, he says, you guys got this, and you'll be able to handle this. You guys have shown courage. And Shaggy and Scooby, what are you talking about? What are you talking about? He says we don't have any magic left. How are we going to survive? And Jack says, no, you guys have shown courage, and courage is the most powerful magic of all. And that's the theme of the movie. And so that's the apple that goes home with you in your pocket. And, a lot of times in sort of, dramatic structure and writing and stuff, the theme of a movie is often stated out loud by a secondary character, by a character passing through the story. Not the main character is going to tell you what the story's about. It's a secondary character that's going to offhand, when you don't expect it, just say something that feels very casual, but that's the theme of the movie. And when Jack says, no, you guys have courage, and that's the most powerful magic of all, and hops off, that was the part that we were trying to be the apple that people took home with them. So I took, and then the last part of that story is that was the last time I ever spoke to Ewo. He passed away about a week later, unexpectedly. And so my very last conversation with him was not only one of my first, if ever, compliments from him that just maybe I wasn't terrible at this, but also that little nugget of, taking something, giving the audience something that they can take home that's meaningful is a very powerful possibility. So that was, so in a lot of ways, Goblin King is very meaningful to me. It's the last one I ever got to make with Ewo. And he saw it before, and he saw it in its entirety. And more or less what I pitched is pretty much what showed up on screen. And, and he was very generous and tolerant to hear me walk him through it. So that's a very meaningful moment for me. And I appreciate you guys letting me tell that story here.
Oh, that's incredible. Thank you so much for sharing that, because that is an incredible story, and definitely one that we'll be taking back with us, and no doubt people watching this will be taking back with them as well. I mean, I think testament to that is, if you think about the time frame of all of this, it's very much we'll be watching these movies when we were kids ourselves, and given the fact that we did take some of that home, and now for all that to stay with us now when we're old enough to do all this Zoom stuff, and we'll be passing it on when we have kids and grandkids, it's just a real testament to the whole timeline of what this is all about. So that is absolutely incredible.
Yeah. Well, it is a joy doing these with you, and I've had a chance to catch some of the other interviews you've done with people. It's so great that you guys are memorializing this and following up with these interviews. It's just, it boggles the mind that some of this stuff was 15 or 20 years ago, and that anybody cares enough to ask these questions, and any of us who made it have any memory left to remember how we did it. But it does start to all come back to you, and more and more memories surface, and it becomes less and less about, whatever it is you were kind of going through your life at that point that was a distraction or a stress or a distress, and more about, the joy of making this work with a really talented, creative group of people who all come together and just try to make each other laugh and try to have a really good time. And you remember the people, and one of the people I want to mention too is Jerry Eisenberg, who's still with us. And Jerry and Ewo were really great friends. In fact, I met Ewo because Jerry introduced me to him, and Jerry was storyboarding on Goblin King and came up with all those great gags of Shaggy and Scooby at the beginning with the carnival when Shaggy's eating Shaggy's eating this lollipop. He sticks it in his mouth and he turns it sideways. Like he's got his mouth, and his mouth is like distorted like this, and he turns it sideways in his mouth and he crunches it. And then Scooby jumps in the apple barrel and comes up with all the apples in the mouth and chomps them and swallows them in one bite. Like these are like classic, Hanna-Barbera gags. And Jerry was a Hanna-Barbera story man and character designer and show creator for a million years. Oh, and another Easter egg is when the book falls off the shelf and Krudsky opens up and finds the Goblin King and the Goblin Scepter, and thinks it's a sign. And then he goes to a book of spells and he catches the fairy, right? He whacks her with the fly swatter, and he goes looking through his book of spells and his like magic dictionary, and he goes, fawn, fable, fang face. And there's a picture of fang face in there. Jerry created fang face for what I believe was Ruby Spears at the time. And then Ruby Spears, I think, became part of somehow Fang Face, but we were able to get the rights to be able to, I think it's maybe part of the Warner Brothers thing now. But anyway, we popped Fang Face in there. And that was specifically because Jerry had created Fang Face. That was his show, which is a kid's show from the 80s, a Saturday morning show that I think maybe it ran for 1 year. It was very obscure, but Jerry drew a lot of Fang Faces. That was his thing, like his running gag to draw a Fang Face for you. So I love that we got that in. I love that Jerry was on this movie. Jerry and Tristan Cole, who was the background painter on a lot of Goblin King, we still get together and have lunch about every couple of months and we used to get together with EWO. There were kind of the four of us would always get lunch together. So we still get the band back together every now and then, talk about old times. But I loved rewatching Goblin King and seeing those great Jerry Eisenberg gags, in this opening of this show, opening this movie. And just remember going, sitting around trying to think of silly things we can do to make people laugh. There is just no better way to spend your time.
It's amazing to hear more about that. That's absolutely incredible. I guess moving on to that, I guess the stuff that may be happening more recently is like, are you currently working on anything that you can speak about, or is there anything that you've done recently that's at all?
Well, I'm having a great time in a lot of ways. It reminds me of my Scooby days. Is that I'm creative producer for Mattel's Thomas and Friends All Engines Go, which is on Netflix and Cartoon Network in the States, and it's on Treehouse in Canada. I'm not sure where it is in the UK. Maybe Channel 4, is that a thing?
Yeah,
something. But it's in the UK. And Thomas the Tank Engine is a beloved, long-standing UK property and Christopher Keenan. Back in the late 2019, I called Christopher. He was at Mattel at the time. He's since moved on, but he was running production over there and development, and they were doing a reboot of Thomas, and they wanted to do a cartoony 2D squash and stretch gag funny version to try to reboot it and do something kind of new and unexpected with it, which is quite controversial given the long-standing history of Thomas as, miniature trains, and then it became CG, but it was always very more realistic and kind of aged up in a way. They wanted a bright, shiny, fun, sing-songy, cartoony show full of joy and light and color and sound, and I just happened to end up at the right place at the right time with Christopher, and he said, hey, this show's going in like 2 weeks, can you just jump on and be the creative producer on it and show run it? And I was so lucky to work with an amazing group of people at Mattel now who are just some of the most wonderful people I've ever worked with. Monica Dennis, who is leads their preschool team over there. Has been a joy, and the show has been as much her vision as mine. She's absolutely killing it. And our story editor was Rick Saval, who just had a show called Dewdrop Diaries come out with DreamWorks. He left the show to go do that show, his own show. And then we got Craig Carlisle from Pete the Cat to come over and take Rick's place as our story editor. And then we did like 150 of these 11-minute squash and stretch, cartoony, fun Thomas shows, which, if you're an old school Thomas fan, it's probably not your bag, but a whole new group of little preschoolers seem to really like the show. We just had a new episode come out called The Great Bubbly Build, which is on YouTube right now. It's a special. It's 60 minutes. No, it's a 30-minute special. It's a shorter special. Absolutely killing it. All the the new generations is on YouTube are loving the show, and it's in a way it's very much a return to my Scooby days, because it is this squash and stretch and cartoony stuff. It's got gag sequences, it's got song sequences, and it's, we've done mystery shows and we've done spy shows. Like, it's a lot, we play around with little genres in it, and it's a delightful show. I couldn't be having more fun. There couldn't be a show more in my wheelhouse. And again, it's another beloved children's property that's been around a really long time, and you're always trying to inject something new and fun and fresh into it. So it does remind me of sort of my Scooby days, and that it's this beloved project, or a beloved property that will only sustain if you continue to put new, fresh life into it. And being able to now, for almost it's been 3 years, we're going on to year 4. We've done 4 seasons of it, and we'll see if if there's going to be more. I'm hopeful that we're going to get more episodes to produce. It seems like it's been well received. Mattel seems really happy. I'm certainly, been very thrilled with the work that we've done with our US team and our Canadian animation studio. It's called Nelvana, and they are just fabulous. We have great directors up there, and Campbell Breyer is the name of our director, and our music team up there are just absolutely fabulous. And we've done a lot of really fun songs. Our music supervisor, Laura Nikolic, I'm gonna butcher her name. Sorry, Laura, if you're watching this. I don't have it in front of me, and I can barely pronounce it if I'm reading it. But she is, totally tops. We've done, I don't know how many songs we've done. We must have done 70 songs now, like little 1-minute songs. And they are just so charming, and really, really talented team. And again, it just comes down to, are you working with talented people you enjoy spending time with? Can you share a creative vision with each other? Can you help one another to realize and try to make something that's good even better? And can you do it on a TV schedule and get it done? And sometimes that can be just really challenging. And the trick is to just always try to wake up and find the fun in it, and understand that the audience is turning this on. They have a lot of choices to watch anything, and what's special about the thing you're creating, why, what's that apple in the pocket that you're letting them take away with. And again, it comes back to, it's Thomas and Friends. It's about friendship. It's about how do you fix something when you break it? Well, how do you repair a relationship when you've done something wrong? How do you say you're sorry and come back? And how to for little kids especially, how do you recover from something? Because we always make mistakes, and it's real easy for a little kid or an adult to get into a bind and not really know the way out of it. And the only way out of it is just to turn around and admit what you did, or see the error of your ways, and try to find your way back to being back in a community of friends and having integrity. So the fact that we're getting to do this whole I get another bite at that apple of friendship, friendship-based storytelling. That's just turns out that's what I like to do. And I've been lucky enough to work with great people who are on that same mission with me. So yeah, check out the new Thomas and Friends if you haven't had a chance. It's a great show. Try to forget everything you know about old Thomas if you can. And don't read the Reddit threads. Just don't do it. Wait 20 years. I'll go back and read the reviews later.
Yeah,
no, we seem to be making it. We seem to be making progress, and people seem to really like the show.
I mean, yeah, staying away from Reddit is just a good idea in general. Like, it's
I'm with you
just
on
a good
that.
place
Yeah.
in general to stay far away from that. But yeah, I had like such a big Thomas collection when I was a kid, so it's really nice to hear that that's being brought to a whole new generation. Is absolutely incredible. But yeah, I suppose that does conclude all of the Goblin King questions that we had for you today. Just thank you so much once again for coming on and for being so generous with your time, because it's been an absolute pleasure to speak with you again. And I just can't believe it's been that long since the last one we did, and now the fact that we've got this whole time to do this. And genuinely, I'm sure we could do this for every single Scooby Doo movie, but I don't know about that. But yeah, thank you just so much for your time today.
It was a pleasure, you guys. It was so much fun. I always love talking with you. Thank you guys for doing this work. You guys know I'll come back and babble on for hours at your request. Let me know. I'm always happy to come back.
Oh, thank you so much. We really do appreciate that. And we really do appreciate everyone watching this today. We hope that you did enjoy this Halloween special and that you were having a good Halloween yourself. Let us know in the comment section if you dressed up as anything spooky, anything Scooby related, especially if it's from the Goblin King movie. It'd be cool to see if there's anyone that's gone as the amazing Krudsky. That would just be incredible. So yeah, thank you
That'd be
so
a
much
deep
for
cut.
watching.
That would be a
Yeah.
deep cut.
Thank you
All
so
right,
much
say
for
it with me,
watching.
guys, and happy
Happy
Halloween.
Halloween. I will see you next time.